Hamas has executed hostages as they have felt Israeli forces closing in on them. And so that's a concern that the families of the hostages have said this week alone.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. And Mike, we've had some new advancements in Gaza, the Israeli government talking about occupying Gaza. Tell us a little bit about what's going on.
So at this point, we've heard directly from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that he intends to have the military reoccupy all of Gaza. And so a couple of things to be noted here is that, number one, he said this before he was heading into a very important security cabinet meeting. And so it's expected that this will happen. He has said he's in favor of it, but they've not come to a definitive decision. And it could be days, if not weeks, before we see the military actually begin such an operation. So while we're moving in that direction, there's still pieces to be put together in this picture. And so moving forward, this will likely anger a lot of people in the international community as we've seen concerns about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza grow in its intensity. And so a big part of what we're seeing now is a byproduct of the fact that President Trump has not echoed a lot of those concerns about recognition of a Palestinian state like several other countries in Europe have. And so President Trump has remained largely supportive of Prime Minister Netanyahu and the way he is sort of going about this war. And so the president has said he will let Netanyahu decide whether or not they occupy Gaza. However, he has said that the starvation in Gaza is real and he wants to see more aid get into Gaza to the Palestinians in need.
So this poses a certain amount of risks for the Israeli military as well, doesn't it?
That's exactly right. It poses risk to the military officers who will be involved in the operations. At this point, Israeli military officials say they hold about 75% of the territory in the Gaza Strip, and it's that last 1/4 of the territory where Hamas has really held up. And there are also concerns that if they go about this reoccupation, the hostages, there are about 50 that Hamas still hold, about 20 or so are believed to still be alive, could be put in danger. Because as we've seen time and time again throughout this conflict, Hamas has executed hostages as they have felt Israeli forces closing in on them. And so that's a concern that the families of the hostages have said this week alone.
So on another front, there's been talk of summits to try to resolve the war between Russia and Ukraine, summit between President Trump and President Putin, and maybe a summit involving all three leaders, including Ukrainian President Zelensky. What's the latest there?
So earlier this week, the president's envoy, Steve Witkoff, traveled to Russia to meet with Vladimir Putin. And so both the U.S. and Moscow said the meeting went well. However, we heard from White House officials since then that the Trump administration still intends to announce new sanctions on Russia, including secondary sanctions and tariffs, at the end of this week. And so what came of that meeting is this talk about a potential bilateral or trilateral meeting with some combination of President Trump, Zelensky, and Putin. And so the three of them meeting would be a historic moment as the conflict has now gone on for 3.5 years. We've seen President Trump, since he started his second term in the White House, he has taken a much friendlier stance towards Vladimir Putin and the Russians in an effort to secure a negotiated settlement to end the conflict. However, through the first 6 or so months of President Trump's second term, President Putin has demonstrated an unwillingness to negotiate an end to the war, which has seen in turn President Trump sour towards President
to take
Putin.
A harder line.
Exactly, and so that's what we've seen with the conclusion of this 10-day period that's set to expire at the end of this week, which will, unless barring a historic moment or something unforeseen, will likely result in sanctions from the United States government being placed on Russia, and the secondary sanctions which will affect a lot of Russia's allies.
And so originally this was supposed to be a 50-day timeline and not a 10-day one.
That's exactly right. So President Trump, when he announced this sort of ultimatum towards President Putin, it was a 50-day timeframe, as you mentioned, which would take us to the first week in September. In the immediate aftermath of that announcement, on the battlefield, we saw the Russian military fire a bunch of missiles and drones into Ukrainian cities, targeting civilian infrastructure. And so in a response to that, President Trump reduced that time frame to a 10-day period, which is set to expire at the end of this week. However, we don't know exactly what else will happen once that deadline ends and a deal hasn't happened. We know these sanctions will be put into effect, but it could take months or years for them to really affect the Russian economy. So until then, the U.S. is exploring other options as to how to arm Ukraine in the short term, but it's unclear exactly what the Trump administration could be considering on that front.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.